Welcome to another episode of the China Horizons podcast series. I am Mario Santander, a researcher at the Center for East Asian Studies at the Autonomous University of Madrid. In today's episode, we are taking a closer look at something that is shaping global perceptions more than ever: soft power and cultural influence. Our guest today is Cristina Baón, researcher at the Center for East Asian Studies at the Autonomous University of Madrid, specialized in Korean studies. When it comes to South Korea, soft power has become a buzzword. We hear about K-pop topping international charts, Korean dramas inspiring global fashion trends, Korean films dominating Netflix and receiving international recognition, and global phenomena like K-beauty, K-food, and more recently, even K-literature. But when we turn to China, the approach to soft power seems different from the one South Korea follows. For our listeners, Christina, could you please start by explaining what soft power is for our audience?
Thank you, Mario. It's really great to be here. So, the term soft power was first introduced by an American academic and government official, Joseph Nye, back in 1990, right at the end of the Cold War. Now, unlike hard power, which involves using military force or economic influence, and here we mean not only pressure like sanctions, but also forms of retribution to make other countries do what you want. Soft power is more of a subtle kind of persuasion, linked with the idea of attraction. Or, as Knight put it, it's about getting other countries to want what you want. Nye identified three main sources of soft power: a country's cultural appeal, the attractiveness of its political values, and the credibility of its foreign policy. And over time, this idea has really become central in conversation about public diplomacy and how countries build their international image. It's especially relevant when we talk about how East Asian democracies, such as South Korea, expand their global influence without resorting to coercion. Of course, there's been criticism too. Some people say it's too vague or hard to measure, and that's true to an extent. But even so, it's still a useful way of thinking about how global influence works beyond military or economic tools, especially through things like media or popular culture.
Now, let's shift our attention to China. The concept of soft power has definitely gained traction there too, but many argue that it's understood and applied quite differently from how Nye originally framed it. Could you walk us through how China interprets soft power?
Sure. So, in the Chinese context, the concept of soft power is understood in a much more fluid and flexible way than in Nai's original definition. The term really started to gain attention around 2007 when the President Hu Jintao stressed the importance of strengthening cultural soft power during the 70th Party Congress. And since then, especially under Xi Jinping, soft power has become an important part of national discourse. In fact, there are thousands of academic papers and policy documents written on the topic. In her book, Chinese Soft Power, Professor Maria Rebnikova talks about how she searched the term soft power over the past 2 decades in China's National Academic Database, CNKI, and found over 7,000 academic articles written by Chinese experts. That gives you an idea of how seriously the concept is taken in China. Now, unlike in Nai's original definition, where soft and hard power were seen as separate categories, Chinese scholars don't usually draw such a clear line. They often combine elements like culture, governance, and even economic strength in their understanding of soft power. But it's worth noting that Na himself later recognized that his original definition was actually too narrow. In fact, he introduced the idea of smart power, which he defined as the ability to develop smart strategies that combine the tools of both hard and soft power. So, in that sense, the Chinese approach, where attraction is closely tied to tools like foreign aid or economic cooperation, can be seen as broadly compatible with this more flexible way of thinking. The big difference, though, lies in who promotes soft power. In the US and other liberal democracies, which are Nine's main reference point, there are many non state actors that contribute to a country's image abroad, often independently from the government. In China, by contrast, the state plays the central role, and there are far fewer non state actors, or at least fewer outside the state's direct control, shaping the country's soft power. When we look at the scope of China's soft power, it goes from the global expansion of the Chinese language through Confucius Institutes, educational exchanges, or Chinese culture, including events like the 2008 Beijing Olympics, to initiatives such as the Belt and Road Initiative or economic aid and investment in regions like Africa. So, in short, it's best to understand it in a more fluid way, one that, in some extent, echoes Nye's later idea of smart power.
That's fascinating, Christina. So it's less about separating economy and cultural tools and more about seeing them as interconnected?
Yes, exactly. And what's also important to note is that in many Chinese writings, soft power is not just about appealing to international audiences. It's also very much directed at the domestic public, strengthening national identity and promoting unity through traditional values, political ideology, and a shared historical narrative. In that sense, culture becomes a broad and sometimes politically charged concept. It can include everything from Confucian values and national spirit to governance models and economic success. So, in short, Chinese soft power isn't only about making China more attractive abroad, it's also about shaping public opinion at home. And that dual focus, both international and domestic, makes the Chinese approach quite distant from the more externally driven concept we often see in places like, for example, South Korea.
That's really interesting. So far, we have explored how South Korea embraces soft power largely through culture, entertainment, and global trends, following the classic understanding of the term as coined by Joseph Nye. On the other hand, China's approach to soft power is much more complex and fluid, blending culture, ideology, economic influence, and political strategy in ways that challenge traditional boundaries between hard and soft power. With such different approaches and ambitions, it's natural to wonder how South Korea and China interact in this sphere. How do their soft power strategies influence their relationship? Do they compete, cooperate, or maybe even learn from each other?
Well, Korea and China are two countries that share a long history marked with deep cultural exchange. Since the establishment of diplomatic relations in 1992, Korea and China have worked to rebuild friendly relations as neighbors, moving beyond the legacies of the Cold War period and expanding mutual exchange and cooperation in all areas, including politics, economy, and culture. South Korea has promoted its soft power mainly through its popular culture, especially K pop, K dramas, and the beauty industry. And interestingly, it was in mainland China where the now famous phenomenon known as the Korean Wave or Hallyu first gained real momentum in the late 1990s and early 2000s. In fact, the term Hallyu was originally coined by Chinese media. They began using the expression Hallyo, meaning Korean wave, to describe the sudden boom in popularity of Korean dramas, Korean pop music, and Korean celebrities among Chinese audiences. Korea later adopted this term, transforming it into Hallyu, which became a key concept in the country's cultural soft power strategy. On the other hand, China's soft power in Korea mostly developed through the influence of the Chinese language, Chinese traditional culture, and tourism. Confucius Institutes are one of China's most prominent soft power tools, and the first Confucius Institute was actually established in 2004 in Seoul, South Korea, which is a notable choice considering that China was also the starting point of the Korean wave or Hallyu. As of 2024, there are 22 Confucius Institutes operating in South Korean universities. And in addition, there is one Confucius Academy, four institutes in middle and high schools, and one private language center affiliated with the program. So this makes a total of 28 Confucius Institutes nationwide. Beyond that, there are also 132 so called Confucius classrooms established in various educational institutions across the country. So, looking back, I do believe that in the early stages, both countries genuinely cooperated and supported each other's efforts to promote cultural exchange and build soft power.
Well, more than 2 decades have passed since then. As both nations have grown more influential on the global stage, their cultural strategies and the way they engage with each other may have evolved as well. So, how has the relationship between South Korea and China developed over time when it comes to soft power? Has it remained collaborative or have tensions emerged?
Well, in fact, over time, the relationship between South Korea and China in terms of soft power has evolved from one of enthusiastic cooperation to a much more complex mix of competition and collaboration. So, as I mentioned before, in the 2000s, the Korean wave really took off in China thanks, in large part, to Chinese broadcasters and entertainment companies actively importing Korean dramas and music. Chinese TV stations, eager to improve ratings and advertising revenue, saw Korean dramas as high quality, affordable content that attracted large audiences. However, this surge in popularity soon created tensions. Chinese drama production companies, which were already struggling with poor infrastructure and low profitability, started to view Korean imports as a threat. And in this way, many domestic series weren't even aired, and Korean content was seen as taking away valuable airtime. Also, public opinion began to shift, with criticism that Korean dramas were receiving some kind of special treatment. In response, the Chinese government implemented restrictions by limiting foreign content airtime, tightening screening standards, and diversifying the countries from which it imported media. Despite these conflicts, cooperation didn't vanish. In fact, both sides found new ways to work together. One strategy was actually featuring popular Korean actors in Chinese dramas, tapping into the Hallyu fandom to boost ratings. Another way was joint productions, where Korean companies contributed capitals, directors, or original scripts, while Chinese partners ensured domestic registration, allowing these series to air during prime time. The film industry, it actually followed a similar path, evolving from basic location support to full scale co productions with shared responsibilities in planning, casting, and investment. So, this kind of partnership allowed both sides to expand into regional and even global markets. Music, however, has faced more challenges. Although Korean artists enjoyed huge popularity in China, the market actually remained difficult. Album sales were undermined by piracy, and while concerts drawn large crowds, they've often been financially unprofitable due to government regulations and complicated profit sharing agreements. Overall, we could say that the evolution of South Korea China's relations in terms of soft power is something of a roller coaster. It rose quickly at first, then began to decline in the mid 2000s despite efforts to maintain cooperation until it hit a major low point with the THAAD crisis in 2016.
It's interesting, Christina, to see how cooperation and conflict can coexist in such a complex relationship. You mentioned that things took a sharp downturn with the third crisis in 2016. That seems like a major turning point. Could you tell us more about what happened during that crisis and how it affected the cultural and diplomatic ties between South Korea and China?
Yes, the THAAD crisis in 2016 was definitely a major turning point in South Korea China relations, both diplomatically and also culturally. It began when the South Korean government decided to deploy the THAAD missile defense system, which the US and South Korea saw as necessary to counter North Korea's missile threats. However, China strongly opposed the deployment, seeing it as a serious threat to its own national security. This disagreement pushed the bilateral relationship into a period of intense conflict, and cultural exchange also cooled down significantly. In response, China responded not only through official diplomatic channels, but also by restricting Korean cultural content. And this is when the so called Han Hanryong, or the Korean Wave ban, was unofficially enforced. So basically, Korean dramas, K pop, and even Korean celebrities suddenly disappeared from the Chinese market. Many co-produced films were quietly cancelled, and in some cases, Korean staff were even removed from film credits. Even Korean dramas or music videos were taken down from streaming platforms. And meanwhile, Chinese content continued to enter the Korean market, creating a very asymmetrical situation. And as tensions remained unresolved, new cultural conflicts began to emerge, mostly online, sparking heated debates among netizens. There were controversies over the origin of traditional items like kimchi and hanbok, over different historical interpretations, and over cultural appropriation. And these disputes quickly escalated, often taking on a highly emotional and nationalistic tone. So, in this way, negative sentiment triggered from both sides. In response to the ongoing tensions, both governments have actually tried to ease the strain. To commemorate the 30th anniversary of diplomatic ties, South Korea and China designating 2021 2022 as the years of cultural exchange, aiming to revitalize cultural exchange and promote civil society level engagement. But the lingering distrust and frequent flare ups show how difficult it is to just separate culture from geopolitics in this complex relationship.
I am quite curious, Christina. What do you mean with unofficially? Wasn't this ban made official? Does this so called Korean wave ban still exist today? Is Korean content still restricted in China, or have things improved in recent years?
Exactly. The Chinese government never formally announced or publicly admitted the existence of an official ban on Korean content. Instead, they applied indirect measures like stricter content reviews and approvals that effectively blocked Korean dramas, Korean music, and Korean films from being distributed in China. So, while there wasn't a clear official law or decree called the Korean Wave Ban on the Chinese side, the practical outcome was the same, as Korean cultural content was restricted for years without any official public announcement. And this type of informal or implicit restriction is what Korean expert and Korean media refer to as an official ban and name it as the Korean Wave Ban or Hanhanryong in Korean. Regarding your second question, this unofficial Korean wave ban has technically lasted for about 8 years, starting around 2017. But here's the big update. Recently, experts expect that China plans to lift this ban soon, and they explain that rather than an official government announcement, this will happen gradually through increased cultural exchanges at the private and civil society level. And moreover, since November 2024, South Korean citizens do not need a visa to enter mainland China for tourism or business for up to 15 days. And since then, the number of South Koreans traveling to China has been noticeably increasing. According to the Ministry of Justice's recent monthly statistics report, 650,000 South Koreans visited China between November 2024 and January 2025, which is a 62.5% increase compared to the same period a year earlier. So, this shift fits within China's broader diplomatic strategy, especially as tensions with the US escalate under the new Trump administration. China wants to improve ties with South Korea, which is a key regional partner. Also, over the last 8 years, China's own entertainment industry has grown tremendously and gained confidence. With recent huge domestic hits in gaming or animation, China no longer sees Korean content as a dominant threat in its market, which encourages them to welcome Korean media once again. So, in short, while the ban has heavily restricted Korean content for years, things seems to be looking up, and Korean wave content is poised to make a comeback in China soon.
That sounds like things are about to change quite a bit, hopefully for the better. I am especially curious about what you mentioned earlier regarding how China's entertainment industry has grown and gained so much confidence, particularly the gaming industry. Could you say a bit more about that?
Yes, absolutely. It's honestly a remarkable shift. And actually, over the past decade, China's entertainment industry, especially the gaming industry, has really leveled up, both in terms of quality and global influence. And we could even bring manhwa, webtoons, web novels, or even animation to this conversation too. And this is a very important turning point since high quality games now allow China to export its culture and content with international audiences in ways similar to how Korean pop culture once spread through the Korean wave for Hallyu. And it's not just about domestic success anymore. Chinese creators are going global and starting to compete with some of the biggest names out there. So now, when we talk about the gaming industry, it's usually divided into three main sectors, depending on the platform people use to play them. And first, we have mobile games, which are played on smartphones and tablets. And this is the biggest market share globally in terms of revenue and numbers of users. Most mobile games are often free to play and make money through in app purchases, ads, or subscriptions. And a good example would be Lineage, which is one of the most iconic and influential game franchises in the Korean's mobile gaming history. Then we have PC games, which are played on personal computers and usually offer more complex and more, let's say, immersive experiences. And this includes AAA games, which means big budget, blockbuster type games with cinematic storytelling and high end graphics. And these PC games can be pay to play, subscription based, or free to play with microtransactions. And just as a side note, some mobile games can also be played on PC, though this depends on the title and the publisher. And finally, we have console games, which is basically the dream for most developers. And to play these, users need to buy expensive devices like a PlayStation, like an Xbox, or Nintendo Switch. So these games tend to be the most expensive, but they also offer the most cinematic, high quality experiences. Right now, this console market is still dominated by Japan, North America, and parts of Europe. South Korea and China have traditionally had a smaller share in this space, but they're starting to invest heavily and really trying to carve out a spot. For mobile games in 2024, Chinese titles accounted for more than 30% of total revenue in Korea when combining sales from the country's three major app stores, which are Google Play, Apple's App Store, and One Store. And just a few years ago, that figure was closer to 20%. So this means that their share has grown significantly. Moreover, according to the Chinese Mobile Game Report released by IgaWorks Mobile Index in April 2024, as of April 23rd, Chinese games held the first, third, and fifth spots in Google's Play's revenue rankings, with Last War Survival by First Fun on the first place, Without Survival by Century Games in third, and Legend of Mushroom by Joinet Games in fifth place. And in contrast, NCSoft Lineage M, which have long maintained the top spot in the Korean mobile game market, ranked second on Google Play and third on Apple's App Store. On the other side, according to the 2024 Korean Mobile Game Market Insights Report released by global upmarket research firm Sensor Tower and cited in Korea's Mail Shinmun in November 2024, 6 of the top 10 overseas mobile games revenue in the Korean market between January and October 2024 were actually developed by Chinese companies. And that's huge, especially considering that Korea is the world's fourth biggest gaming market in terms of revenue, and mobile dominates there. The Chinese titles include First Fun's Last War, Survival, Joynet's Games, Legend of Mushroom, Century Games Without Survival, MiHoYo's famous Genshin Impact, and Honkai Star Rail. And we could also mention Brawl Stars, which was originally developed by the Finnish company Supercell, but today this company is more than 20% owned by the Chinese tech giant Tencent. So during the survey period, the most profitable mobile game in the Korean market was actually First Fun's Last War Survival. And if we look at Google's Play's revenue rankings for July 15th, 2025, which is this year, the trend continues. Chinese First Fun's Last War Survival held the number one spot in Korea's Google Play Store. And in second place was NCSoft's Lineage M. Third place went to Netmarble's Seven Knights Rebirth, followed by another Chinese title, which is without survival, in fourth place. So, all of this really points to a major shift happening right now. The mobile games that used to be the backbone of Korea's domestic market are starting to lose their hold. And meanwhile, Chinese titles are racing up this App Store charts and their market share is growing fast. Maybe faster than actually anyone expected. Korean experts are even calling it a domination.
That's very insightful. Christina, in your opinion, why have Chinese game companies been so successful in breaking into the Korean mobile games market?
Well, at first, Chinese games companies really, let's say, struggled to break into the Korean market. The market was totally dominated by Korean MMORPGs, which stands for massively multiplayer online role playing games, especially the lineage style games that Korean players were incredibly loyal. And to be honest, early Chinese games didn't bring anything new. On top of that, they had a bit of bad reputation since people saw them as low quality copies. But things started to change when the whole MMORPGs bubble burst. Korean developers had overloaded the market with similar pay to win mechanics, and players, especially the younger generation, they just got tired of it. That opened up a real opportunity, and Chinese companies stepped in at just the right time. They didn't just copy the old formula, but they actually brought new genres. Strategy games like Last War and Without Survival gained real traction, and on the other side, you had Hoyoverse launching anime style games like Genshin Impact and Honkai Star Rail. So, all these games felt fresh, they felt fun, and they were high quality visual stunning. So I believe it felt very different from what Korean players were actually used to. And beyond that, production value is a big part of the story. Chinese developers are now outpacing Korean studios not just in quality but also in speed. They even successfully entered into the console market with Black Myth Wukong, which gained massive international hype for its AAA graphics. I don't know if you've played it, but the game looks incredible. With lower labor costs and massive investment behind them, they can build faster and cheaper with impressive high quality.
Now that you mention Wukong, that was a massive success.
Exactly. It's a game inspired by the classic Chinese tale, Journey to the West, and it sold over 10 million copies in just 3 days after launch, becoming the fastest selling debut title in gaming history. And that's huge. So, actually, the interesting thing is that some Korean experts have argued that Chinese pop culture doesn't really work as soft power because, in a lot of cases, the Chinese characteristics kind of gets toned down or hidden, especially in games. But with Wugong, it's the total opposite. This game is proudly rooted in Chinese mythology, and it is still managed to make a huge global splash. And not just in mobile, where China already dominates, but in console and PC gaming too, which are far more demanding in terms of cost, graphics, and production time. And it's not just in gaming. We're seeing a similar trend in digital publishing too. Chinese webtoons and web novels are actually becoming pretty popular in Korea. You can find them across all sorts of genres, from romance, fantasy, even mystery, and they're being featured regularly on Korea's two biggest platforms, Naver Webtoon and Kakao Page. According to Koka, or the Korean Creative Content Agency, Chinese webtoons really started entering the Korean market in a big way after 2017. A couple of titles like Soul Land, in Korean Elpisutongi, which is a youth fantasy, and One Night Wife, known in Korean as Harubam Ane, which is a romance, got a lot of attention from Korean readers. White Night Wife even hit number one on Naver Series monthly chart and number two on Kakao's page's real time rankings. It also did really well on other platforms like TopToon. And then there's BL Web Novels. On Ready, one of the biggest platforms for web fiction, Chinese BL web novels dominate the top 10 in the monthly international charts for July 2025. So, yeah, it's not just that Chinese content is entering the Korean market, it's actually doing really well. And while Chinese films or Chinese dramas and Chinese music might not be that popular in Korea, sectors like video games, webtoons, and web novels are definitely gaining significant traction and reshaping the cultural landscape. And in my opinion, this shows how soft power can actually take many forms and find success in unexpected places.
Does this mean, Christina, that the image of China in South Korea is improving?
Well, when it comes to games, a lot of Chinese titles that make it big internationally and in Korea don't actually feel all that Chinese at first glance. In other words, these works tend to maintain a content design, composition, and market direction that does not strongly emphasize their Chinese origin. Therefore, there have been cases where audiences did not realize for a long time that the content that they were consuming was actually Chinese. Now, there's another strategy too. Some games do include clear Chinese cultural elements, but they mix them in with influences from other cultures, creating a kind of global or transnational identity. The best example for this is Genshin Impact. The game is built around a world that's divided into seven regions, and each one is inspired by a different culture. So far, we've seen regions based on medieval Europe, China, Japan, Egypt, and Russia. So, even though there's a strong Chinese influence, especially in the Liyue region, it's balanced out by all these other cultural references. And it actually makes the game much more universal, which is probably one of the reasons it's resonated with so many players worldwide. However, and especially in the case of gaming, Korean players do know that games like Genshin Impact or Black Myth Wukong are made in China, and yet they keep playing them. They like them and they enjoy them. And actually, this is a pretty big deal because younger South Koreans, what we now call the MZ generation, are known for being especially sensitive to anything related to China. Local media often reports that younger generations have strong negative sentiments toward China compared to other generations, while showing greater favorability toward Japan. So basically, media usually portrays that the younger generation is leading this anti China trend, and at the same time, they say that this same group is softening anti Japanese sentiment in Korean society. But here's the thing: the Institute for Peace and Unification Studies at Seoul National University published a paper which tried to verify the factual accuracy of these domestic media reports, which are mainly based on short term surveys, by analyzing long term survey data from academic institutions. And what they found is that, yes, people in their 20s do show stronger and more consistent anti China sentiment compared to older generations. However, for people in their 30s, it's a different story. Their feelings toward China are much less consistent, and in fact, before the COVID 19 pandemic, they were sometimes even more positive about China than older generations. According to this study, people in their 30s seem recognize China's strategic value to South Korea, even if their personal impressions about the country are mixed or negative. So, when you look at this closely, lumping all the young people together as the 23rd generation or the MZ generation and saying they all feel the same about China doesn't seem to be really accurate.
And what are the reasons the study mentioned as the main factor for anti China sentiments within South Koreans in their 20s?
So, about the reasons behind the anti China sentiment about South Koreans in their 20s, this study published in 2023 points to a pretty interesting factor, which is the rapid increase of Chinese international students in Korean university. And this has led to a lot of frequent and often negative interactions. Korean universities facing declining freshman enrollments, frozen tuition fees, and cuts in government funding have actively recruited Chinese students to help cover their financial gaps. And by 2019, there were over 70,000 Chinese students in Korea. Now, this influx has brought some tensions. Things like separate grading system for Chinese students, struggles with group projects, disputes over fairness in grading, or even accusations of reverse discriminations, disagreements related to political issues like the Hong Kong democracy protests, and difference in culture and lifestyle. And all these have fueled negative perceptions. But honestly, I think it's a way more complicated than just that. There are also deeper issues, in my opinion, like historical disputes, enforceable views of Chinese leaders, and environmental problems like fine dust pollution. Plus, there's the big issue also concerning ethnic Koreans from China, which adds another layer to this complexity. Now, going back to your question about whether the Chinese entertainment industry can improve China's image in Korea, personally, I think the boom of Chinese video games is a positive sign. Just as K pop fans know the nationalities, the ages, or the names of group members, Korean gamers, that is, people who are into video games, they know these games are Chinese and they enjoy them anyway. But of course, it remains a sensitive topic. Attitudes can change quickly depending on political events or historical issues, just like what happens with Japan. And when political tensions or historical disputes flare up, boycotts against Japanese products and media often follow. So, while popular culture like games might open doors for more positive cultural exchange and understanding, these developments exist within a complex context. And moreover, for the relation to be truly balanced and mutually beneficial, it's also necessary for China to lift restrictions like the ban on Korean cultural exports and allow South Korea to export its soft power freely without limitations. Only through open cultural exchange on both sides can a more equal and constructive relationship be fostered. So, while challenges remain, I believe there's room for more cultural understanding and growth.
Thank you very much, Christina, for such a fascinating and insightful conversation about the reach and challenges of soft power. We will definitely be watching closely how this dynamic continues to unfold, especially how Chinese soft power, particularly through the gaming industry, shapes China's image on the global stage. A big thank you also to all our listeners and supporters of the China's Horizon project. You can stay connected with us through our social media channels and visit our website at chinahorizons.eu for more podcasts, policy briefs, academic articles, and much more. This episode, From K-pop to Chinese Video Games, exploring the interplay of soft power between South Korea and China, is based on the research of Cristina Baon, and it was recorded with the help of Mario Santander. We are grateful to Tatiana Fisac and Mario Esteban for their valuable comments and feedback. All of us are members of the Dealing with a Research in China TWARC project. Thank you all for listening, and we look forward to bringing you more engaging discussions soon.